Our reading this morning comes from Leslie Takahashi. This is Marginal Wisdom. They teach us to read in black and white. Truth is this, the rest false. You are whole or broken. Who you love is acceptable or not. Life tells us truths in many hues. We are taught to think in either or, to believe the teachings of Jesus or Buddha, to believe in human potential or a power beyond a single will. I am broken or I am powerful. Life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We are taught to see in absolutes, good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. The day is coming when all will know that the rainbow world is more gorgeous than monochrome, that a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in its course, that the margins hold the center. The truth about stories is that there is no single truth, but many. Stories can give us a frame to work in, a familiar beginning, middle, and end, the protagonist, plotline, and moral. These constructions give shape and form to our ideas and experiences. They help us make sense of the world and ourselves. Stories give us space to be creative, to expand our thinking, to help us move outside of the binary thinking we can fall into for so many reasons. Stories help break open our focus, our imaginations, our curiosities, letting us explore ideas we might not have otherwise dreamed of. Stories can help us try out ideas and explore aspects of our or others' identities. They can point us to new truths, new realities, or new realizations. Or they can point us to confusion, muck up the waters, or obscure the truth. Stories may be the one aspect of being human that so far sets us apart from other animals. Stories teach us, comfort us, challenge us, let us experience new things and find ourselves. Stories have power. They can create new possibilities and destroy others. Maybe the greatest truth about stories is not just that they're all we have, but that we need them. Humans are meaning-seeking, meaning-making, storytelling creatures. We need stories because they help us know who we are. In our story earlier today, Max the seagull finds himself called by the wind to a place that wasn't his home, but was indeed his home. The garbage dump was all he'd ever known, and it was familiar, and he loved it, and still, something never quite clicked, right? And one day, the wind brought ocean smells, and he can't stop himself from following the scent. It, too, is familiar, even though it's new. In his body, he responds to the scent, finds himself drawn to it. Despite what he knew of the world, something within told him that this was a part of him, something about who he was, and he needed to explore that possibility. So he flew to it, discovered a whole new world for himself, and one that was truer than the one that he had known before, even though he had never entirely let that one go either. He made space for both of them to be a part of his life. That's one of the powers of stories. They show us that we can try new things and learn how to hold them in our lives, to make space for more possibility than it seems we can manage without some imagination. Max, the seagull, discovers life could be different and better. And because he was happier and wanted others to share this happiness, he told them about his experience, and others who were curious left what they had known as home to discover it for themselves. One way to look at the story then is that sometimes we know a place, and even though we feel that it's home, we leave for another place, and it's just even more home to us. I'm sure people in this room can resonate with that to some extent. Something just clicks for them. Another way to understand the story is that sometimes the journey is less about travel and more about discovering our most authentic selves, making an inward journey, something like learning to manage our thoughts, feelings, and actions, knowing when to dive into ourselves to work through a problem that's been causing us difficulty, and becoming a loving presence in the world. Discovering the new possibilities and what we love, what brings us to life. Or something completely different. One of the gifts of stories is that they can be reframed and used to highlight different things and can be interpreted and reinterpreted in different ways. Stories don't have one moral or theme or interpretation, and they continue to teach us new lessons even after many years. I once had someone share with me that after more than 35 years of sharing the Passover story with her spouse, that year it was different somehow. That story, more than 3,000 years old, still offers new interpretations and meanings after all these years. And the meanings and interpretations and the important parts are going to be different for each person who hears it. There may be some consensus, but there will also be a wide variety of individual, personal interpretations and points of resonance. Stories can also be dangerous, though, or at least problematic. Decades ago, for example, when Kodak and other film companies were developing and perfecting their films and solutions, if you remember what those are, they settled on a strategy that generally seemed to be highly effective. What they did was they took a picture of a woman wearing black and white against a gray background. These were called Shirley cards because the first woman to pose for this purpose was named Shirley. If the dress in the prints was yellow or the background was blue or green, the processor would know that something was probably off with the solutions and they needed to tweak them somehow. Now, Shirley was a white woman with dark hair. This helped with the contrast, and Shirley's skin looked more red. This was another cue that there was something that was wrong with the processing. This was a reasonable strategy. There's contrast and things to look for and quality control sample, this Shirley card that could be used to evaluate if things looked the way they were supposed to. And calibrating the film and the solutions to this white woman made all people of color, especially dark folks, look wrong. Sometimes they were a mud brown, sometimes a blue black, sometimes much darker or much lighter than they actually are, sometimes even the same person in pictures taken within a few minutes of each other. For years, if black or dark brown folks were in pictures with white people, they were very dark and indistinguishable, except often for their teeth and eyes. Their coloring was never right, whatever their hue. To try to correct for this, for a long time, photographers and filmmakers tried to work around this by putting extra light on the darker folks. For those of you who might remember Sidney Poitier in the movie In the Heat of the Night, he was sweating so much because lots and lots of extra light was thrown on him so he could appear sort of correctly next to his white counterpart. What happened was that the Shirley cards became a single story. Becoming the standard, the measure for systems operation, the cards made it possible only for white folks to appear properly in their pictures. The story was so singular, so embedded in the standard that it was years before the standard and the process were questioned and addressed. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with the Shirley cards for being white. And with this strategy, Kodak used one standard for what was normal for processing colors with its films and solutions. That normal was white, and deviations from it literally made other people look bad. Generations of photos and films with people of color, especially darker folks, were distorted because of this standard. Shirley was the single story of what people should look like in pictures, or what people were expected to look like in pictures. And the danger was that that didn't make space for everyone to be represented. Maybe this doesn't seem so dangerous, but this is one example of taking a single story, a flattened, one-dimensional story that lacks nuance or doesn't make space for possibilities and options. And if this can happen with pictures, think of all the other ways in our life that may be impacted by the single stories that we wouldn't even know to wonder about. When we have single stories about gender, for example, the current administration saying there will only be 2 options legally, this is dangerous and damaging. The narrative that goes along with it is one of terror and fear-mongering for anyone who doesn't conform, resulting in assaults against our people, possibly their homes, so often their bodies, their beliefs, values, and culture. Single stories can destroy. Reduced narratives become stereotypes instead of stories that good or evil, black or white, old or young, male or female, liberal or conservative. They become the false binaries that overwhelmingly populate our lives. In her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie says, "The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story the only story. When we flatten the story of who is a man or woman, and underneath that, who is a person, or how we define gender, or what it means or does not, and therefore who is dangerous, we don't tell other stories. For example, some people are born intersex, with variations in DNA, genitalia, and other differences possible among these individuals, who make up an estimated 1.7% of the population, although we don't know the numbers for sure. If nature allows for such a spectrum, perhaps it's not so unreasonable that we might too follow suit." Adichie continues in her TED Talk saying, "The consequence of a single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar." I used to use this insight more regularly before Adichie did what she warned us about doing, using a single story as if it's the whole truth. She has taken what is referred to as a trans-exclusionary radical feminist stance, also called TERF, regarding the definition of who is a woman, and is deeply transphobic. And while I have found value in her work, as I've said, I would be remiss to neglect to name the ways we sometimes don't understand how we perpetuate single stories in our lives and in the world. It's important to realize that the stories are how we make sense of our lives, and so the stories that we tell matter. When the stories are flat, one-dimensional stories that lack nuance, they are problematic. They're problematic because very little, if anything, in our lives is actually that way. Another reason it's problematic is because we need to be able to find ourselves in them. It's easy to try to identify ourselves as either the protagonist usually, or sometimes with whatever the protagonist is working against, but even that is very simplistic. There was this meme going around years ago that contrasted an extreme wealth and utter poverty in India. There was this picture of this billboard with a wealthy person, disclosure, our current president, on it, and advertising an extravagant hotel chain, very beautiful and elegant. And below that sign, there were people sleeping in a street and tucked under makeshift shelters. It's really dirty. And it's easy to look at that picture for most of us and empathize with the poverty we witness, especially in the face of this wealth that's portrayed on a billboard and what seems like a cruel placement of it in a place where people are literally sleeping on the street. But many of us probably don't identify with either group well. The meme was reframed by a religious educator colleague of mine, C.B. Beale of Justice and Peace Consulting, as a way of exploring privilege and understanding ourselves in bigger systems. Behind the people on the street, there are 2 parked cars. CB points out that those cars actually represent many of us as car owners, as people with some level of privilege, as people who participate in a capitalist system that allows for such wealth and poverty. They observed that sometimes we need to stop and wonder when there is a binary, especially when one that doesn't readily include us. We need to stop and ask, where are we? Where do we go? Where am I in this picture? If we can't truly identify ourselves in a story or in a narrative, we cannot do anything with it, and that is what's dangerous. We may replay it in our minds over and over as we think about something that is true, but unless we are in the story and it's not ours, and when we perpetuate it, we may be doing harm to ourselves and others. But if we can locate ourselves within the story, we can claim it and find deeper meaning. When we find ourselves, the narrative becomes a tool that we can use to tell another story, one that resonates more with what we know to be true, and we can disrupt dangerous narratives. When we can't find ourselves in stories, we have to wonder why that is and what dangerous narrative that story is perpetuating. When we tell ourselves about the world we know or the world as we know it, we are telling stories about who we are. We need complex stories sometimes because being human takes many shapes and forms, even if the themes often work out to be similar. We need to tell the stories of our true identities. And when we do, we make it possible for others to find themselves too. This is how we find out that we really do belong at the ocean, that there is a place for us in the picture. This is how we see the margins and the spectrum, when we can be with both and the and. Stories have power, and when we are good stewards, they offer or create possibility, and the way that we use and tell them matters. Because the truth about stories is not just that they're all we have, but that we need them to make sense of ourselves and the world. May we use them to bring more compassion and justice to our living. If you would please rise and lift your voice in song with me for our closing hymn, The Fire of Commitment.